Welcome to Storytelling Dog, where we share powerful, emotional, and life-changing stories that will leave you breathless. If you believe in kindness, courage, and the unseen heroes among us, then hit that subscribe button and turn on notification. Because today, I'm bringing you a story of a girl with nothing, who risked it all to save an innocent child. It all started on a bitterly cold night. The streets of New York City were nearly deserted, the wind howling through the alleys, carrying the scent of rain and gasoline. Harper, a young homeless woman, huddled beneath her tattered coat, pulling her only companion, a small golden-furred dog named Rex, closer for warmth. She had nothing. No home. No family. No future. But she had him. Another freezing night. "Buddy," she whispered, stroking Rex's back, trying to ignore the hunger gnawing at her stomach. "We'll be okay. Somehow." Rex let out a low growl, his ears perking up, his body tensing. Harper stiffened. She had learned to trust Rex's instincts, and right now, something was very, very wrong. Then she saw it. A black van parked just outside the convenience store. Its windows were dark, its engine off. Something about it made her uneasy. She was about to turn away when Rex bolted. "Rex! Stop!" she gasped, but the little dog yanked free, dashing toward the van. He scratched furiously at the side door, barking, growling, his nails raking the metal like he was trying to dig something out. And then she heard it. A sound so faint, so desperate, that it made her blood run cold. A child's soft, terrified crying from inside the van. Harper's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she pressed her face against the grimy window. A little girl. No older than 2. Her tiny hands pounded on the glass, her tear-streaked face twisted in fear. She was trapped. Harper's stomach churned. This was real. A kidnapping. She spun around. No cops. No one watching. Then, the chime of the store's doorbell. Her heart nearly stopped. 3 men stepped out, dressed in dark coats, hoods low over their faces. One of them carried a bag of supplies. His eyes flicked toward the van. They were coming back. Harper barely had seconds to act. If she ran now, she could pretend she saw nothing. She could save herself. But then she looked at the little girl again. And she knew if she didn't do something, this child would disappear forever. She had no weapons. No plan. No backup. But she had Rex. And she had nothing to lose. What happens next? Can Harper outsmart these criminals and save the little girl? Will she survive the night, or will the kidnappers find her first? Don't miss part 2. Hit like, drop a comment below, and subscribe to Storytelling Dog for more gripping, heart-stopping true hero stories. Harper's breath came fast and shallow. The cold night air burned in her lungs, but she barely noticed it. The 3 men were moving toward the van, their voices low, their movements casual, but Harper knew better. These weren't ordinary men. They weren't just loading groceries into their car. They were monsters. And they were coming for the little girl. Her time was running out. Her mind raced. Think, Harper, think. Then she met Rex's eyes. He stood ready, ears perked, tail stiff, his small body trembling with energy. That's when she knew. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't look away. She was going to fight. Harper lunged for the van's door handle. Locked. Her pulse pounded. She banged against the glass. "Shush, sweetheart, I'm going to get you out of here," she whispered to the crying child. The little girl hiccuped a sob, her tiny hands pressing against the window. Harper looked around wildly. Something. Anything. Then, she spotted it. A rusty brick lying near the curb. She grabbed it with both hands, heart hammering, and swung with everything she had. Crash. The window shattered. Glass rained down as the little girl shrieked. Harper reached in, ignoring the sharp edges that cut into her skin, and pulled the child into her arms. Tiny fingers clutched Harper's coat, sobbing into her shoulder. "It's okay, baby," Harper whispered. "I've got you." But she had no time to comfort her. Because at that exact moment, hey! One of the men spun toward her, eyes wide. The bag of groceries dropped to the ground, spilling out apples, cans, a pack of cigarettes. For a second, just a second, everything went still. Then, they ran. Harper clutched the child tightly and bolted into the darkness. "Stop her," one of the men roared. Footsteps pounded behind her. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She sprinted through the alley, her breath ragged, her legs screaming in protest. The little girl's cries were muffled against her chest, but Harper held on tighter. "Come on, Rex," she gasped. Rex was right beside her, his small legs a blur, his teeth bared, snarling fiercely. Harper took a sharp turn down a side street. Bam! She crashed into a pile of trash cans, nearly losing her grip on the little girl. Behind her, the men were gaining. Harper's mind reeled. "I can't outrun them forever. I need to hide." And then Rex barked. Not his usual bark. A different bark. A signal. Harper's gaze followed where Rex had stopped, a narrow hole beneath an abandoned building, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. She didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees, shoved the little girl inside first. The child whimpered, but Harper hushed her softly. "You're okay, baby, just stay quiet." Then she wiggled in after her, squeezing into the darkness, pulling Rex in last. She barely had time to pull a broken wooden crate in front of the entrance before, boom. Heavy boots skidded to a stop right outside. Harper clamped a hand over the little girl's mouth. The footsteps stopped. She could hear them breathing. Right outside. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Please don't find us. Please." One of the men cursed under his breath. Where the hell did she go? A moment of silence. Then, find her. The hunt wasn't over. Harper squeezed her eyes shut, holding the child against her chest. She wasn't safe. Not yet. But she would not let them take this little girl. Not while she was still breathing. Harper held her breath, pressing herself and the little girl deeper into the cramped, dust-filled crawl space. The wooden boards above them groaned slightly under the weight of rats scurrying through the abandoned building's framework. The air was thick, suffocating, and every heartbeat felt like a hammer against her ribs. Outside, the men stood in tense silence. "She couldn't have gone far," one of them muttered. Harper felt the child tremble in her arms. Small fingers clutched onto her coat, a whimper caught in her throat. Harper gently pressed a hand over the girl's mouth. "Sure," she whispered, barely audible. Above them, heavy boots crunched against the pavement. A pause. Then one of the men kicked a trash can, sending it flying. The metal clanged against the concrete, echoing through the alleyway. Harper clenched her jaw, forcing herself not to flinch. "Spread out," a voice snapped. Footsteps scattered. One set moved away, but another came closer, too close. Through the slats of the broken wooden crate, Harper could see the outline of a man's leg as he stepped closer. His boot stopped inches away from Rex's tail, which was tucked tightly against his small body. Harper felt Rex trembling. But he didn't bark. He didn't move. The man exhaled sharply, his breath fogging in the cold air. "She's a homeless girl, for God's sake," one of the others scoffed from a distance. "She won't risk her life for some kid she doesn't even know." A pause. "Then, she already did," the man closest to her muttered. Harper's stomach twisted. The man crouched down. Harper's entire body stiffened. She could see him clearer now, a rough face with an unshaven jaw, cold eyes scanning the area with unsettling patience. His hand reached forward, fingers brushing the edge of the crate. Then, a car honked loudly from the main road. A moment of hesitation. Then another man called out, "Cops might be patrolling soon." Let's move before we draw attention. The crouching man didn't respond at first. His fingers tapped against the crate, as if weighing his decision. Then, finally, he exhaled in frustration and stood up. "We'll find her," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "No one messes with us and walks away." And just like that, they were gone. Harper didn't move. She didn't even breathe. She waited. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Only when she was absolutely sure they were gone did she allow herself to exhale. She pulled her hand away from the little girl's mouth. The child burst into silent sobs, burying her face against Harper's chest. Harper tightened her arms around the child, her own body shaking from the rush of fear and adrenaline. "It's okay," she whispered, stroking the little girl's matted hair. "You're safe." Rex let out a small, shaky huff, pressing himself against Harper's side for warmth. Harper swallowed hard. No. They weren't safe. Not yet. They needed to get out of the city. Now, Harper's limbs felt stiff as she carefully shifted, easing the little girl's trembling body off her lap. Her fingers brushed against the damp, cold floor beneath them, and her breath came in slow, measured exhales. She listened. Silence. The men were gone, for now. But she knew better than to trust the quiet. Harper glanced down at the little girl in her arms. Her tiny face was streaked with dirt and dried tears, her hands still clenched into fists around the fabric of Harper's coat. The child had cried herself into exhaustion. Harper gently ran a hand over her tangled brown hair. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she whispered. The little girl hesitated before mumbling. "Maddie." Harper forced a small smile despite the dread curling in her stomach. "Okay, Maddie. I need you to be very brave for me, all right?" Maddie sniffled, but she nodded. Harper turned to Rex, who sat alert, his ears twitching at the faintest sounds. His eyes met hers, and she knew they had to move. Carefully, she pushed the wooden crate aside and peeked out into the alley. Empty. The men were gone, but she didn't trust it. They were searching for her, and they wouldn't stop until they found her. They had likely already checked security cameras. It was only a matter of time. Harper's mind raced. She had no money, no phone, and no place to go. If she went to the police, would they even believe a homeless girl like her? But this wasn't about her. This was about Maddie. And Harper would rather die than let those men take her back. Taking a deep breath, she adjusted Maddie on her hip, pulling her coat tighter around the little girl. "Come on, Rex," she whispered. "We're getting out of here." Rex stayed close to her side as they slipped out into the night. Harper knew the city like the back of her hand. She had spent years surviving on these streets. She took the back alleys, ducking into shadows whenever she heard voices or approaching footsteps. Her legs burned from exhaustion, but she pushed forward. Maddie clinging to her like a lifeline. She had to think. She needed a place to hide. Somewhere those men wouldn't think to look. And then it hit her. The old train yard. It was abandoned, had been for years. The homeless sometimes used it as shelter, but no one ever stayed long. It was too dangerous, too exposed. But it was exactly the kind of place no one would expect her to go. Clutching Maddie tighter, Harper quickened her pace, Rex trotting beside her. By the time they reached the train yard, the sky had begun to lighten to a dull grey, signaling the approach of dawn. Harper ducked into an old, rusted train car, setting Maddie down gently on the dusty floor. The little girl yawned, her eyelids fluttering, exhaustion weighing her down. "We'll rest here for a little bit, okay?" Harper murmured, brushing Maddie's hair back. Maddie nodded sleepily, curling up against Harper's side. But Harper didn't close her eyes. She couldn't. Because somewhere out there, those men were still looking for them. And they weren't going to stop. The morning air was damp and heavy, the scent of rust and oil thick in the abandoned train yard. Harper sat with her back against the cold steel wall of the train car, her body stiff, her senses razor-sharp. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Maddie had finally dozed off, her small frame curled against Harper's side. Her little fingers still clutching Harper's coat. She was safe for now. Rex, however, remained tense, his ears perked, his nose twitching at every distant sound. Harper knew that feeling well. The feeling of being hunted. She gently stroked Maddie's back, her mind racing. What now? She couldn't stay here. The men would never stop looking. But where could she go? Her pulse quickened as memories of foster homes, shelters, and endless closed doors flickered through her mind. No one would help her. No one ever had. But Maddie wasn't her. Maddie had a family. A home. Someone out there was looking for her. Harper just had to get her there before the men found them first. And then, a noise, a car door slamming somewhere in the distance. Harper's breath hitched. She glanced at Rex. The dog's entire body had gone rigid. His ears flattened against his head, a low, barely audible growl rumbling in his throat. They were here. Harper's pulse thundered. She gently shook Maddie awake. "Sweetheart, wake up," she whispered urgently. Maddie stirred, rubbing her tired eyes. What's happening?" Harper pressed a finger to her lips. "We have to be very, very quiet, okay?" Maddie blinked, confusion in her sleepy eyes, but she nodded. Harper grabbed Rex's leash and eased toward the train car's door, peeking out. A black SUV was parked near the fence, and standing beside it, two of the men. The same ones from the night before. Harper's stomach dropped. They were scanning the yard, moving slowly, methodically. One of them spoke into a phone, his expression grim. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she knew what it meant. They weren't leaving without Maddie. Harper's grip on Rex's leash tightened. She looked around, searching desperately for an escape route. The train yard was vast, filled with old, rusted cars and tangled tracks. If she could get to the other side without being seen, then her foot slipped on the gravel. The small sound was barely louder than a whisper, but it was enough. One of the men's heads snapped toward the train car. Harper barely had time to react before she heard. "There. She's in the train yard." They had seen her. Panic shot through Harper's chest like ice. "Run," she whispered harshly, grabbing Maddie and bolting out the other side. Rex barked sharply, following close behind. Behind them, the men were coming, boots thudding. Voices shouting. The hunt had begun. Harper clutched Maddie tighter and ran. Harper's legs burned as she ran, clutching Maddie tightly against her chest. The sharp gravel beneath her feet bit into her skin through her worn-out shoes, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The men were closing in. Their footsteps thundered behind her, their voices sharp and filled with rage. "Don't let her get away." Harper darted between rusted train cars, zigzagging through the abandoned yard, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had to think fast. Ahead, an old maintenance shed loomed in the distance, its door hanging open, rusted hinges barely holding it in place. It wasn't much, but it was something. She sprinted toward it, diving inside just as a bullet ricocheted off the metal beside her. They were armed. A choked gasp left her lips, but she bit down the fear. She had to keep Maddie safe. Harper pressed herself against the farthest wall, trying to calm her breath. Rex stood beside her, his body low, his growl vibrating through the air. Maddie whimpered softly, her tiny fingers clutching Harper's shirt. "Sure, baby," Harper whispered, stroking the little girl's hair. Outside, the men slowed. Footsteps crunched against gravel. They knew she was inside. "Come on out," one of them called. A voice too calm, too patient. "We know you don't have anywhere to go." Harper swallowed hard. She squeezed her eyes shut. Think. 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 Then her gaze flickered to the back wall. A vent. It was small. Too small for her. But Maddie, Harper's heart clenched. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want to let go of Maddie. But it was the only way. She turned to the little girl, cupping her face gently. "Maddie, listen to me, sweetheart," she whispered. "I need you to crawl through that vent, okay? As quietly as you can." Maddie's lower lip trembled. But what about you?" Harper forced a smile despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I'll be right behind you, okay?" It was a lie. But Maddie didn't need to know that. The child hesitated, but Harper gave her a firm nod. Tears welled in Maddie's eyes, but she obeyed. Harper lifted her up and helped her squeeze inside. Rex let out a low, reluctant whine. "Go with her, boy," Harper murmured. For the first time, Rex hesitated. But then, he obeyed. Harper watched them disappear through the vent just as the door burst open. 2 men stormed inside, guns raised. And Harper did the only thing she could. She ran straight at them. They weren't expecting it. She crashed into the nearest man with everything she had, knocking him off balance. He cursed, stumbling back. The second man reached for her, but she twisted away, kicking over a pile of rusted tools, sending them scattering. "You little," a hand grabbed her arm, too strong, too fast. Harper fought. She kicked. She clawed. She bit. But she was outnumbered. One of them slammed her against the wall, pinning her. Harper gasped, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Then, the roar of sirens. The men froze. Red and blue lights flashed through the shed's broken windows. The police. One of the men cursed. "We got her, Gio." The other hesitated, his grip on Harper tightening. For a moment, she thought he was going to kill her right there. But then, he shoved her aside and ran. Harper collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath as the sound of their footsteps faded into the distance. Then, strong hands were on her shoulders. Miss, are you okay?" Harper blinked up into the face of a police officer. Behind him, other officers swarmed the area. And standing at a safe distance, wrapped in a warm blanket, clutching Rex tightly, was Maddie. Her tiny voice broke through the chaos. "Harper." Harper's heart nearly split in two. She barely had time to react before the little girl launched herself into her arms. Harper held her tight, burying her face in Maddie's hair, tears slipping down her face. She had saved her. And as the officers led them away, as the sirens faded into the night, as Rex nuzzled against her side, Harper finally allowed herself to believe it. For the first time in a long, long time, she wasn't alone anymore. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and clean linen. The beeping of heart monitors filled the space. Steady and rhythmic. Harper sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the bandages wrapped around her arms. The bruises on her ribs ached, but none of it mattered, because across the room, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, Maddie slept peacefully, safe, warm, and unharmed. And beside her, clutching Harper's worn-out hoodie in his tiny paws, Rex snored softly. Harper exhaled, staring down at the hospital gown they had given her. It felt foreign against her skin, too clean, too unfamiliar. She wasn't used to comfort. She wasn't used to being cared for. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up just as a tall, well-dressed couple stepped inside. The woman's eyes were swollen from crying, her hands clutching the strap of her designer purse so tightly her knuckles were white. The man beside her had the same anxious expression, his neatly tailored suit slightly disheveled as if he had dressed in a hurry. Harper knew who they were before they even spoke, Maddie's parents. The woman's breath hitched the moment her eyes landed on her daughter. With a choked sob, she rushed forward, falling to her knees beside Maddie's hospital bed. "Oh my baby," she whispered, brushing Maddie's hair back, pressing desperate kisses to her forehead. "Oh my sweet, sweet girl." Maddie stirred, blinking sleepily. And the moment her gaze focused, "Mommy," tears poured from the woman's eyes as she scooped her daughter into her arms, sobbing into her hair. Harper looked away. This was their moment. She didn't belong in it. She pushed herself off the bed, wincing slightly, and reached for her coat. It was torn, stained with dirt and blood, but it was hers. It was all she had. She had done what she needed to do. Maddie was safe. That was all that mattered. She took one step toward the door, then another. And then, wait, Harper froze. She turned slowly to see Maddie's father watching her, his eyes unreadable. He stepped forward, glancing at the bruises on her arms, the way her coat barely clung to her shoulders. "You saved her." His voice was hoarse, filled with something Harper didn't quite understand. "You risked your life for my daughter." Harper swallowed. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to being seen. She wasn't used to mattering. She cleared her throat. I heard her crying." The man exhaled sharply, as if trying to keep himself together. "You're a hero," Maddie's mother said, her voice thick with emotion. Harper's chest tightened. She wasn't a hero. She was just a homeless girl who had been in the right place at the right time. Before she could say as much, Maddie wiggled out of her mother's arms and ran straight toward Harper. Harper barely had time to react before tiny arms wrapped around her waist. "Don't go," Maddie whispered into her stomach. "Please don't go." Harper's breath caught. Her hands hovered uncertainly over Maddie's small shoulders, unsure if she should hug her back. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to love. But then Maddie sniffled, and Harper's arms wrapped around her before she could stop herself. Maddie squeezed tighter. "You saved me," she whispered. Harper closed her eyes. She didn't know how to explain to this little girl that Maddie had saved her, too. After a long moment, Maddie's father cleared his throat. "Miss Harper." Harper looked up hesitantly. "We owe you everything," he said, voice firm. "You saved our daughter. And we're not just going to let you walk out of here alone." Harper's heart skipped a beat. She glanced between Maddie's parents, suddenly unsure of what was happening. The woman stepped forward, wiping at her tears. "Let us help you." "Help?" Harper's fingers curled slightly. No one had ever offered her help before. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know what to do. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm golden glow over the room. The air felt lighter, as if the weight of the night's horrors had finally begun to lift. Harper sat at the edge of the hospital bed, staring at the clean clothes laid out in front of her. A soft sweater. A pair of warm jeans, even a pair of shoes that actually fit. It felt unreal. She traced the fabric with her fingers, hesitant, as if touching it too hard might make it disappear. Across the room, Maddie sat on the floor with Rex, giggling as the little dog licked her face, his tail wagging excitedly. Harper felt her lips twitch into a smile. For the first time in years, she wasn't worrying about where she'd sleep tonight. She wasn't thinking about the cold streets or the pain of hunger gnawing at her stomach. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Maddie's parents stepped inside, holding cups of steaming coffee. They looked at her with something Harper couldn't quite place: kindness, gratitude, something deeper. Maddie's mother sat down beside her, placing a gentle hand on Harper's. "You don't have to keep running, Harper." Harper stiffened. Running. It was all she'd ever known. She opened her mouth to protest, to say something, anything, but the words never came. Because Maddie had already crawled into her lap, wrapping her tiny arms around Harper's waist. "Stay," the little girl whispered, her voice small, but sure. Harper's throat tightened. She had spent her whole life believing that love, warmth, and family were things meant for other people. But as she looked around, at Maddie clinging to her like she belonged, at Rex curled up at their feet, at the two adults who had seen her, truly seen her, and still chose to open their hearts to her, Harper realized something. Maybe love wasn't just for other people. Maybe it was for her, too. She swallowed past the lump in her throat, then nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Maddie's face lit up with pure joy, and her mother pulled Harper into a tight hug. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Harper felt safe. Felt wanted. Felt home. And in that moment, with Rex's happy barks filling the room, with Maddie's giggles echoing in her ears, Harper knew this wasn't just the end of her story. It was the beginning of something beautiful.